Dial Models Workshop.
Hi, it's Yeji.
And Clint.
Hey, it's Larry. You are entering Models Workshop After Hours, a modeling podcast where we talk about miniatures, model painting, and we cuss a lot. If you can be offended, we're probably going to offend you. Then you're going to laugh, and you're going to feel bad. And then we'll offend you again, and then you'll laugh again. You see the pattern. So kick out, sit back, grab your brush, grab your paints, and get ready to have some fun.
Good evening, model workers, and welcome to another Models Workshop After Hours UK. And this is episode 11. We've got Ian.
Howdo.
And from a different part of the UK, namely Chicago, we've got Jim. Hey, Jim.
Welcome all.
Yes, we don't discriminate. We have an almost Welsh person and one of them Yankee Americans. What time is it over your way?
It is only 4:09 p.m. and I'm used to this being in reverse. I'm used to doing things at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning here.
Yeah.
So that it is breakfast over there, or supper in Australia.
Well, we've got it's 10:10 in the evening here in the UK, and it's just the right time to sit down with a bright light bulb and start painting some crap.
Yeah, bedtime.
Bedtime. Yeah,
That's what I'm doing right now, painting a bunch of figures.
So, as Ian said while we were waiting for you to get ready, let's ask Jim what he's got on, and then we can sit back for half an hour.
That's a good start point.
So I'm going to make myself comfortable. And what you got going on, Jim?
Well, it just got interesting in the last month or so when the folks that did the Song of Ice and Fire games said, "Hey, Jim, have you painted any Song of Ice and Fire miniatures?" And I said, "What the hell is that?" He said, "What do you mean?" It was this big Kickstarter thing, Game of Thrones. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's that TV show." They went, "What the hell?" So, long story short, they sent me the starter box, and I've been furiously prepping those figures for all kinds of different tutorials. I want to try and... It's part of the army painter stuff that I've been doing, where you tackle units and armies instead of just single figures. But with this, I want to try a few things where I do the same unit in non-metallics and then in true metallics, or whatever you call the thing where you use metallic paint. So both sides get to kind of see that. I've been doing figures in oils and then in acrylics and vice versa. But the thing that excites me the most is the Lord of the Rings. It's back. It is back. And it means I have to rebuild all of my armies, but it has a pulse now.
That's great.
Which makes me happy.
You've got all your Easterlings out, haven't you?
Those, I finally have replenished those enough to have a workable army, although I see that all of the named characters across the board are gone. You can't even find them on eBay, but they took them all off the GW site, which hopefully means that maybe those will be new plastics.
From what I've heard, they might be... they're updating those because those were metals and then fine cast, and they're redoing them in the new Warhammer resin. Okay.
I wasn't sure. I know that for Sigmar and other things, they've done those. Well, even Theoden is a single figure plastic thing, so I wasn't sure if that was the route they were going to go.
That's only a rumor that I've heard, and as with all things, we'll find out when they actually bother to release them.
I have my Army of the Dead back, too, so I'm really looking forward to doing those. And now I actually have a Rohan army because we got the starter set thing. So the Rohan figures that we had from the original Two Towers set, they were sort of cannibalized. I used the horses to make Candice chariots.
Right.
So now we're really expanding this. We've found some stuff that had been in a vault somewhere, and other people have sent us some of their Lord of the Rings stuff generously, so that is back.
Nice.
I'm looking forward to it, and of course, since this is Models Workshop, technically it's Terrain Workshop, and now that Lord of the Rings is back, it means more new terrain.
Well, yeah, over the summer I scratch built a weather top from the old was it the Fellowship of the Ring, the first edition source book, which had all the scenery patterns to make your own.
Ooh, that sounds nice.
It's great, and it's about 18 inches wide, maybe a bit bigger, and it's not as detailed as the Forge World kit that you can buy for what's that, about $300-400. It's about 250 quid over here, and it's not quite as detailed as that. It doesn't have as many pillars on it, and obviously it's made out of polystyrene and whatever else I throw at it. But it's weathertop, and it looks like weathertop, and it's got steps, and it's got things to hide behind. And if I can ever get hold of any Nazgul, then I'll be able to actually throw some Fellowship at it.
That's another thing, because we into the night we were talking about, okay, what was in metal, what were some of these old box sets, and wasn't one of them, it was the set of all the ring wraiths.
Yeah, and
they were only ever in metal.
Yeah, and they are super, super expensive on eBay. So I'm not touching those just yet. I mean, there are 9 ring wraiths, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's about $100, 60 quid on eBay for a set of 9 ring wraiths, and that's too much for some small black figures.
Well, I think I was looking on eBay, and things were kind of what I had seen for years, and then all of a sudden, I went, what just happened here? Why did these same things increase 2, 3, 4 times in price? And then people said, well, Jim, take a look at the GW site.
Yeah.
And it was all revealed. Well, one says, oh, okay, you just can't get these anywhere now. Yeah, they were gone from Amazon. They're not even there anymore. I was really, really surprised, and then I saw that, and went, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking of just sculpting my own Kamul the Easterling, because who knows when they'll ever come out with it. The Forge World one, well, I don't really need to spend that much on one not so well sculpted figure, so I'll just sculpt my own.
Right.
He's a robe with some armor and a helmet. That's it. So that shouldn't be. That would actually be a fun little thing to do. You know, the only figure that I ever sculpted that wasn't a monster, one of those type of things, was actually an Eowyn figure, but not in the combat style, but just like Eowyn, just in the usual dress. Their civilian Eowyn.
Okay, yeah.
And it was fun because I used to do a lot of portrait painting, so it was fun to sculpt something to match a likeness instead of you're just sculpting a figure to sculpt something.
Well, I think the Eowyn figures were not brilliant sculpts, were they?
No, and actually they gave me the combat versions of Eowyn, and the one on horseback had half a face. The rest of the face didn't cast. So that's a little less like Eowyn. And the other one that did have a face, really, I mean, it looks like some vaguely female character with long hair.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got the Arwen on horseback, and she doesn't quite look right. She's very mannish.
Yeah, she kind of looks like Elrond.
Yeah. And then I didn't bother getting it, but the Council of White, the White Council, Galadriel, in that set actually looks like a dude in drag.
Yeah, because that was, even back in the day, was insanely expensive. And we said, well, they could have at least made it look somewhat like the characters. How did this get past New Line Cinema?
Yeah. I mean, Elrond was good, and Gandalf was good, and even Saruman was good, but yeah, Galadriel was terrible. The only good Galadriel they did was the her throwing a tantrum. What's the line where she turns everything green and black, and
she talks about what she could do with the ring.
Yeah. When she's being tempted by the ring, and all will love me, and
She goes all spectral.
She does, yeah. She basically turns into Peter Jackson's The Frighteners.
Yeah. That was actually the game that I liked the most, and the other couple of systems that I've played since, they were basically, okay, Lord of the Rings is gone. This is very similar to how those mechanics worked, and even the thing with some of the other games, Lord of the Rings was the most cinematic because the individuals really reacted with the terrain.
Yeah.
You could get down to table level and see just a few guys facing maybe a horde of others. The fights were paired off, precariously balanced on some piece of terrain because they could be tossed off. And there was you had to do the leap rolls and the climb rolls, so they interacted, it seemed like, more with the terrain than any of the other game systems where terrain was literally just to get a cover save.
Yeah, I played my first actual game of Lord of the Rings at the store 2 weeks ago. They had an evening of, they called it the Hurly-Burly because of some line in the original rule book that said the Hurly-Burly of something or other. And so they found that really an amusing thing to... sorry, I'm being distracted. The dog has decided to growl at the curtains and pull them around. Bloody animal. Yeah, so it was the night of Hurly-Burly. I think the Hurly was the Friday night, and then the Burly was the kids' one on the Saturday morning. And so it was turned up with 500 points of Lord of the Rings minis. And they'll set it up on their board, and off we go. And there was one guy there running he wasn't the store manager, he was just one of the other customers. I assume he was just a regular Joe. He had brought everything, so in case everybody needed reinforcements, which I certainly did, because I think I had about 150 points worth of anything. He was there and he knew all the new rules, all the old rules, and I mean the new rules apparently aren't much different to the old ones.
I've watched as many podcasts, battle reports as I could find on the new stuff, and one of the biggest things now is that they're trying to emphasize the named heroes, because back in the day you were better off with just standard captains and unnamed heroes.
Okay.
So you could have more of those, more troops, and just overwhelm the named guys. And they've tried to switch that around through various ways. I looked through the scenarios. Those are also a big improvement over what was back in the day. There's a lot more of them, too.
That's
and
good.
You have army-wide special abilities. Each army has a special ability, and they tried to take a little more control over who can ally with who.
Okay.
And it wasn't so much you can never ally with these, but if you do, you will lose your army bonus. And they try to say, okay, if you have Theoden, he lets you do this, and then if you also have Eowyn with that. So they're trying to make things, I think, speaking of cinematic, they're trying to make more of that versus just let's point value the heck out of this thing.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
That's kind of the game I'd want to play. Is it's Lord of the Rings. It's narrative. It's it's not just a tournamenty kind of math hammer kind of thing. You want to feel like you're in there, and we really did. I mean, with my little band of Knights of Gondor, or no, it was the Knights of Minas Tirith. Plus a couple of the extra things that he gave me. I think he gave me a Boromir on horseback. So, I mean, I died within about 20 minutes completely. Because I don't know what I'm doing with the game yet. But it was great fun. And it really felt like there was tension between all these little factions and all the bad guys coming over the hill. And it was a really good battle.
I know they did some things with the character. Instead of everybody can do these same heroic actions, they took some away from some, and gave some to others, again, to make the named heroes be more unique instead of, okay, here is a captain, we'll slap 3 or more abilities on him and call him Theoden. They tried to make it more, okay, this is Theoden, and this is what he should do and how he influences your entire army. And you're even just what you can choose to even put out on the table changes now with these characters that you have, because I know I had a good and evil army and 0 guys were named except maybe for Amdur, I think, on the Easterling side.
Okay.
I know there was one really large game that we did, must have been about a 1,200, 1,300 point game, and I know it was the only game I ever had Grima Wormtongue out there.
Okay.
And the whole point of him is he just bums people out.
Yes, somebody pulled him out on our table and something weird happened.
He basically just sits there and cries into his little handkerchief, and everybody just starts getting really sad and just getting depressed, and they don't want to fight anymore, and they certainly don't want to use things like might or will.
Right.
And that was, I think I stuck him in this unit where Boromir was, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden Boromir has no might because he's just getting so bummed out.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Oh, yeah, it's like seeing, Grima crying in his handkerchief made him think about his younger brother and how mean he'd been to him. And he felt all guilty and all his might went away. Fancy that. And, oh, yeah, and we had Saruman in there, and he basically turned everybody into bowling pins, just knocking them down, although I guess Sorceress Blast has also been changed a bit.
Okay.
It can't quite bowl people over. I know for me, one of the other reasons I loved it, having been Tomb Kinged, which, yes, that's a verb.
Yeah.
In Lord of the Rings, cavalry really is cavalry, and chariots really are chariots.
Okay.
Those really do some nasty things like you would expect, as opposed to just, okay, this is something that just costs a bunch more points and maybe moves faster.
Well,
I don't know how.
Paint it red, no?
Oh yeah, is that? Yeah, it's Speed Freaks Lord of the Rings style. I just remember this dwarf army furiously shooting crossbows at just a regular old chariot, not a king or anything like that, and the arrows were just bouncing off of it. And I said, wow, this is what's supposed to happen with chariots.
Brilliant.
They're not supposed to basically fly apart the first time a random breeze hits them. Which, Tomb King's chariots, that's pretty much what they did.
Okay.
So, yeah, it was, and when they knock you down, that's the thing, is the cavalry stuff gets extra strikes on the charge, and then it knocks you down, which now doubles the kind of damage that you can take. And a chariot doubles that double. It's a bunch of points, and it's only the one guy, but chariots are something to actually fear. And that was the welcome surprise when I started playing those, was that, wow, people actually have to worry about these things now? That's sweet.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to picking up some more figures and getting a decent army together. Now that it's back and it's a game again, and I mean, I played the Mines of Moria box set with my kids over the summer, a couple of the tutorial sort of levels, and it's all measure in centimeters.
Oh.
And we don't have any sort of Warhammer-y kind of things that are in centimeters. So yeah, we just had to pull out a regular tape measure and start doing that, and so it's almost like I'm doing with them watching Star Wars on DVD with the old theatrical edition before I let them see the special editions and then the Blu-ray Ultimate fuck-ups. They still have only ever seen the theatrical versions of Star Wars, so I guess with Lord of the Rings we've got to start with centimeters, and then once we've learnt that, we can progress and move on into inches.
Oh, geez, we just realized that we need to kind of rewatch the movies because we last saw those maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah, I haven't seen them for about 8 or 9 years.
because we tried to listen to we used to paint figures listening to the soundtracks, and when between the two of us we couldn't remember, okay, who's dying in this scene, okay, yeah, dreamy elf music, something's going, we know that, and you can recognize some of the individual tunes, but what was actually going on in the movie, we said, oh no, wait, that happened actually in Two Towers, not in Fellowship. And we're like, well, I guess it's time to watch those again and kind of get back into things.
I'm going to have to leave you for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to mute me. You chat amongst yourselves because I've got to go and deal with this four-legged shouting thing.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's a warg or something there.
It's not far off it. Right, I'll see.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, I'll see you in a minute.
See you in a bit. Yeah, now there's, what is his name? Zorpazorp Gaming, I guess, is kind of the name of his YouTube channel. And he had done mass amounts of Lord of the Rings terrain, as in basically spending 7 years building Osgiliath in 28 millimeter.
Wow.
In playable fashion, as in modular, you can move things around, play different parts of Osgiliath. He had the waterfront, and then he went through the names of the different structures. So he didn't just build random stuff with domes. He said, no, this is the structure that housed the Palantir. This is the armory. This is that one bridge. And this is why this stuff was actually sinking into the river. It wasn't like the buildings were built into the river. Everything was literally sinking into the river. And then he did an Edoras board, which was, again, super modular. Because he said, you can make a great Edoras board that you can use once, never find a place to store it. And he figured out a way to make different gatehouses. He made a stable with actual stalls in it so that you could go inside and try and steal horses. And I was just like, wow, that's really amazing. So now I know what I'll be doing for Lord of the Rings.
For the next 8 years. And there's me struggling to work out how a Space Marine arm goes on, and there's people making all these like towns and cities. I've not seen the film, but the new Blade Runner film, I think there's a video on YouTube, and they actually show you making the city, and a lot of the stuff that people think is CGI of the city is actually a model that they built, and they're just like moving it around, and then they go, oh, we haven't got enough chipping on these buildings, so they go in and you see them like putting pencil marks on it and stuff like this. It's just amazing what people can actually create in such a small scale.
And I know for me, terrain used to take so much longer, and then I discovered it's basically 1/4-inch thick pink underlayment foam. It looks like insulation foam, but it's actually for under kitchen floors or whatever, and it comes in 2x4 sheets, so like an accordion. It has a lot of the properties of foam core, but the nice thing is, A, it does not warp when any kind of water hits it like glue, plaster, paint, because it's not paper. But you can carve into it. You can take a pencil or a pen and put stone texture in it, really. You can even roll texture over it with the Green Stuff World texture roller. And it's really light and really strong. And you could literally chop it up into a bunch of thousands of tiny bricks or stones if you need to. You know, that Gondorian, the way they do that kind of very special fluting on the crenellations on a wall, very easy to do it in this pink foam as opposed to the foam core, which takes a little bit of hacking away with a X-Acto knife.
Yeah, I think we've got a similar stuff here. I think it's like a green foam, but I believe that they put like a foil covering on the one side because it's meant to go on the floor and underneath tiles. I don't know how similar it is, but it's definitely not as thick as insulating foam.
Yeah, you can really just knock out some buildings, and since bolt action is the game that I've really been doing the last couple of years, that is, again, the figures really interact with the terrain, as in, if there's no windows, nobody can shoot out. And is it a ruin? Is it intact? And each of the floors has to be removable. So if it's a 3-story building, you need 3 separate floors. which at first kind of sounds like a pain, but now you also have potentially 3 buildings in one, or you use the top 2 floors if they're intact, and you can make or the top floor is a ruin, but the 2 floors underneath that are intact. So you can start to make one building. Yes, you're spending a little more time making the one, but now you have more options available in how to use that one building. And Lord of the Rings is kind of the same way. You need to have your buildings be that modular and that playable. So it's been good training for getting back into Lord of the Rings. I worry a bit that most folks say, well, it's pretty much going to get a specialist games designation now, instead of being well, heck, it used to be the number 2 system.
Yeah, it will be
when
interesting.
the movies were going.
Because they've got a TV series coming out, haven't they? Which is meant to be like Amazon have commissioned or meant to be commissioning like 5 seasons of it, and it's going to be portraying different characters. So from what I've heard the last time is the first season is meant to be about a young Aragorn. So I don't know whether that will inspire more people to get back into it.
Apparently the budget for that is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion.
Yeah, so I believe, Amazon just like to throw money at stuff, don't they? Hopefully it will stick.
Yeah. Well, we were, again, kind of you recall just how long ago Lord of the Rings was, and I had to tell somebody last night, you realize that first movie came out 17 years ago. And when you think of what people were still using pagers, there were no cell phones, computer monitors were gigantic vacuum tube TV screens practically. And you think now the technology for $1 billion it would cost $10 billion to do what you could do today back 17 years ago.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it would be 17 years because I think it came out when I just left school going into college, and I'm like 33 this year, so yeah. Wow.
Because we got married in December of 2001, and my niece, she went to a movie theater in Minnesota up there. That's where we got married, and she went to see Fellowship of the Ring while they were up there. And most people are, no, it can't be that old. I said, oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
So has the warg been silenced?
Yeah. Bloody animal. He's sort of barking at the back door because he wants to go out for a wee, so I take him out the front, and it takes him for like 10 minutes to do anything, and then, and now he's sort of staring at the bowl of food that he's half eaten and sort of looking at me saying, but I want to eat more. Well, eat that. Eat what you got. Eat what you have first, and then you can have some more. A bit like my wife says, stop buying more models, paint what you've got.
No.
There's been a lot of memes there. Oh.
It's like I bought the entire scale colour range, not the fantasy, just the standard range. And when they arrived, my wife goes, "Oh, you got plenty of paints now. You don't need to buy any more, do you?" And I just chuckled at her. That's not how it works.
No.
It's like going, "Oh, you've bought 2 pairs of shoes. You don't ever need any more, do you?" It's just not happening.
What is that? Everything is relative. For me, I don't really use too many paint colors, but there's a reason. I used to do 2D art for many years, and you really only had 8 or 9 colors. I mean, that was it. Anything else you might have gotten was literally just some combination of those you already had. So mixing was the thing. And it wasn't until we got into the miniatures where we started seeing these walls of paint jars.
Yeah. Yeah, one of... have you done any of the Models Workshop bingo chart? Have you seen?
No, what is that?
I haven't done it.
I keep seeing it. What the heck is that?
So it's like I assume it's 8x8. I'm not sure, it might be 6x6, but I think it's 6x6 grid with one in the middle that's not. So it's around 35 squares of tasks that you have to achieve by the end of the year to get a full house. And it's things like add green stuff to a mini, sculpt a bit of green stuff to add something new to a mini, like a hood or a cloak or something.
Paint a chibi.
Paint a chibi. Paint in your local hobby store was one that I did a couple of months ago that I managed to achieve, and the chibi as well. And one that I'm yet to do is paint using only red, yellow, blue, black and white.
I spent the last 2 days doing that.
Yeah, there you go.
Literally with
500
just
bottles.
those two.
And mixing
Just those
everything in
colours.
between.
Well, I was trying to test out a new line of paints, and I told them, just send me those colors. Send me red, white, or red, yellow, and blue, a white and a black. That is it, because I'll then know how well these things mix.
Yeah.
And that's those bingo charts. At least from what I gathered on those, it's like, yeah, that's Tuesday for me. That's all of those things happen on a daily basis, and then there's another dozen things that aren't even on those bingo lists or whatever.
Yeah. Well, you should download the chart and tick it off by the end of the day, and just say, message Yeji and say, yeah, I started this morning, and yeah, I finished it.
It's kind of scary that it is that way. It's like, well, okay, build half of an Osgiliath board, build 2 bolt action tables, convert a toy train into a usable piece, paint a bolt action army, paint 4 stone trolls, fix 3 unpaintable minis, and try and resurrect 30 or so Lord of the Rings figures. Yeah, that's a day or two.
Nice.
And I've done some mold lines on a bust.
Yeah, I've glued some hair onto a thing.
Yeah.
One of the things is paint a mini using nothing but craft paints. Like apple
I don't know
barrel.
if I could get away using Joe Sonja paints, because I got quite a few of those. Does that class as craft paint?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know the range.
No, I can't remember what they. Yeah, maybe I can swindle it, because I was tempted to use those because I was talking to a Korean painter. I think he owns MJ Miniatures,
Right.
or something like that. And in Korea, they mostly use Joe Sonja. Well, that's how they started out, because they didn't have access to all the European countries' paints. And, their artwork looks really, really good, and I thought I'd get some to try and mix paints. And I wanted to go from, like red, blue, and yellow. And because they've got the actual, like cadmium red and all this type of stuff, then it would be easier than using, I say, Games Workshop paints, where you don't really know. I'm not good enough to know whether that's got a tinge of blue in it, or whether that's got a tinge of like yellow in it, or whatever it's got.
Yeah.
So I thought if I got the standard paints, I'll go that way. But I still haven't got around to it. But I will one day learn. But I did watch a YouTube video of a painter that does oils, and he said his favourite way of mixing paints, and he said the only 4 colours you actually really need is a good red, a good yellow, a good blue. Is it burnt umber and white? Never use black, because nothing in reality has black. It's a man-made colour. And he said sometimes you can't get the really, really bright colours in nature, so you have to use something like a phthalo blue just to give you that. But he said the majority of colours you'll ever need to paint, if you're doing, like oil painting, would be red, blue, yellow, brown, and white, which I thought was quite interesting.
That's why I've been enjoying the oil painting so much over the last 2.5 years or so. It drives people nuts when I tell them, look, you don't have the such and such red and tentacle pink and all that. You'll take these, you will make your own. I show them how to mix flesh tones, and I always use my own skin as an example. I say, look, in a few seconds of mixing, I can now put this brush on my skin. You can't tell where that brush just hit my skin. Try doing that with any jar of paint. not going to happen.
No.
It's going to be vampiric white or nuclear holocaust orange or whatever.
Yeah.
It'd be like the old Clearasil spot cream that was skin coloured, and you put it on a spot and it was bright orange.
It literally is, because we tried using those when we first started painting, and we'd say, dwarf flash, we might as well just take some burnt sienna and just mix a little yellow with it. It's more rust colored than it is flesh colored. Yeah, that's I drive people nuts even when it's just regular acrylic paint. I'll never use a paint name. I'll say it's a burnt sienna, it's a burnt umber, it's a little bit, it's like a cad red or something like that, or a alizarin crimson. Drives them nuts, but it's the one unifying force.
But which is that in the P3 formula?
Yeah, I think that's what confused, because obviously most people that paint miniatures aren't from an artistic background. So if you are, you could probably look at a paint and go, that's pretty much what it is. You know, it's like gypsy pink or something. Whereas to me, I'm just like, yeah, it just looks like pink. I don't know. Is that pink? Is that fuchsia? Is that, God knows. So it's, sometimes it's hard to paint if you don't know like an artistic way of using colour. That's why I think for some beginner painters, it's not necessarily you need like a recipe, because recipes only work as long as the variables are always consistent. So I don't know what the best thing is for beginner painters, whether it is to just use set colours or whether they should, whether I should start with just a red, a blue, and a yellow, and just mix and then paint, and whatever it turns out as, it turns out as.
Well, I wouldn't consider you a beginner painter, so I think you're ready to graduate onto getting rid of all of your pots of multi-shades and just getting the Wapelius range of acrylics.
I'm going on beginner painter because I look at, like, obviously, I'm not an expert painter, but I look at what I can do, and then I go on Instagram and I look at a few people's painting, and I just want to flip my table over and walk out.
Well, if you remember, I don't know if you've heard the podcast about 3-4 months ago, I think it was, that Jim and Yeji came up with the idea of. Well, it was Jim's idea of the nail varnish bottles of paints.
It was the world's most fabulous paint line.
That's right, and there was only 7 paints in it.
That's all it was. Basically took that kind of introductory Winsor Newton set of colors and thinned them down with the white spirits and put them in the nail polish jars, because it gave them the same properties as the Migamo oil brushers, which are essentially thinned down oils in something that's a solid container that doesn't tip over. Yep. That you got a little brush and you can brush it right out on your palette, and boom, it's ready to go. No clogging dropper bottles, none of that aggravating crap.
So when are you Kickstartering it?
Well, hey, now that I've found sticker paper that can go through the printer, and we were going to do this for ReaperCon just for kicks, but we'll do it for Adepticon, where we actually print up labels for these things. And
Nice.
The box that it comes in is this decorative box, so we're going to put some kind of box art around it and really make it look like it's an actual thing, and see how many people we can convince that this is a genuine product. And
Well,
I'm sure, given the way people really are always searching for miracle products in the miniatures world, I think we could pull it off.
if you stick your name on it,
Wapple's snake oil.
There you go. You could sell 7 pots of thinned down Winsor & Newton paint for probably about, what, $100? If it's in a nice cardboard box with a picture of you on the front and your logo. Done.
Or you would have some shredded paper in the box as well.
Oh, yeah.
Just for added effect. Maybe red.
And maybe, as some companies do, put a small packet of Haribo in there just to say, this is a personal touch. This wasn't packaged by a machine.
And you could even put in like a little like card, like a playing card size, with the bottle on it, the nail bottle on it, and then at the bottom you could put like /200, and then you could give them all different. Only 200 ever made.
We can also include super special bonus items like these special Wapelia sable brushes, the 35-cent a piece craft brushes. So if there's a set of 3 in there, at least increases that to $150.
There you go.
And if we put some of the famous socks in there, the painting wristbands, as we'll call them, at least a $200 set. At least.
They're like sweatbands.
They're basically socks where you know how the toe or the heel gets a big old hole in it? Instead of chucking it in the garbage, you cut the elastic part off. You wear that on your wrist, and originally I did that to stay warm in the wintertime because you really can't wear long sleeve shirts while I'm painting. And I caught myself inadvertently just brushing the leftover paint onto one of the wristbands. So I never need paint towels anymore.
Yeah,
I just
I've
wipe
got
the brush
like
on my wristband.
Do you know, like the tennis sweatbands? I used to use those while I was on my PC to keep my hands warm. But I'll probably end up using those in this room when I'm painting when it gets colder. So it's a similar.
That's great. I like that. I didn't know that was a thing. Yeah.
Sock bands.
Sock bands. Yeah.
Well, I'd been excoriated for ruining actual sweatbands, which are expensive, by getting them all covered in paint. And then it was, well, here, maybe these would do the same thing. And sure enough, actually they're better than wristbands. And they're fantastic every time, especially when I'm doing basing stuff, because now I'm handling all the oxide paste and other things that wants to just stain everything. And I can just clean up my brushes right there on my sock that I'm wearing, which also keeps me warm.
Love
and
it.
if in the summertime, like here, it was 90 degrees just a few days ago. Now it actually is below, we might be below freezing by tomorrow night. When it is that hot, you can actually just like soak those in ice water, and it will reverse the process. It will actually cool you down when it's super hot.
Yes.
And it can almost be like a wet palette. You just stick your paint right there. You don't even need a palette anymore.
Wet palette on the wrist.
You have towel and palette all in one handy thing. Oh, we just increased the value of that box to $250.
$250. There you go.
Yeah.
Yep, it'll be the wet palette sock. Because it'll be a different version than the dry palette sock.
The Wapalicious palette sock.
So, and of course, if it has the champion logo on there, now it'll cross-pollinate some worlds, so you'll paint like a champion.
That's it, yeah.
Because it'll say champion on your sock.
The more you use it, the better it gets.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. The
Yeah.
more way you get out of it. You have to wear your sock palette in.
That is, I'm going to have to maybe just film some videos with this stuff and just make it seem as real as possible. The whole 1995 but wait, there's more. It's a $300 value for just $450. It's a steal.
From somebody, definitely, yeah.
And then you have to have a little clip of somebody not using one and how frustrated they get. Like, I don't know if you're in the US, you have like JML. But here we have the JML adverts, which, someone's trying to iron something. And to make it look like you can't iron without this iron, they get all the other irons and they like rip up your clothes and they burn everything through it. And the ironing board falls over. And then as soon as you use their steam gliding iron, the ironing board's fine, the clothes are fine, the person ironing's got a really big smile on their face.
It's like when Joey tried to pour milk.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. If because my entire existence is Star Wars and Friends quotes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we have those here where it's all the person's basically opening a door, and they like fall out of it, and 3 people are killed, and he was opening a door. But now with this miracle device, opening a door is safe and easy.
Yep, that's JML.
Standard infomercial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can be yours for $19.99.
With 17 easy payments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over 2 weeks.
It's in some ways I kind of do that when I'm in the Badger booth, because a couple of years ago it became a thing where I go into the Badger booth and just do demos with the airbrushes, and it's no more high tech than the stuff that I'm doing like here with the socks and the craft brushes. I mean, if people ask me, so what size needle is it? I said, I don't know. I says, when I press this trigger, does paint shoot out the other end? They said, yeah. I said, that's all I care about. I don't care about the needle size or like how much air pressure are you using? Like, how far away do you think he is? And I'll point to Ken. Like, well, he must be like 6 feet away. I said, if I can hit him, then it must be at about 40 psi. And I'll just start shooting paint at him. And they make it seem like it's all this complicated stuff. No, it's just literally press the trigger, paint comes out, goes on your figure. Like, but how would you paint an eyeball? And I hold up a brush. And I said, with one of these. Like, haven't you painted hundreds of eyeballs with a brush? Why in God's name would you need to do that with an airbrush?
How do I paint an eyeball and an iris on a 28mm figure with an airbrush? Don't.
So I was working on, this was a half-sized bust. So it was half the size of a human head. And they said, so how are you going to paint the eyes with an airbrush? And I said, here, look, stick around. I'll show you how I'm going to do this. And I put away the airbrush, turned off the compressor, brought out a brush, and painted both eyes in about 45 seconds. And they said, but what about the airbrush? I said, it doesn't do eyes. If I was doing a 2D painting, whatever, yeah, maybe I'd do that. Actually, no, I'd still use the brush because I don't want to mask things off. I used to use a really tiny Pache airbrush with an external needle that actually did paint pencil lines. Right. And I ended up having to mask things off. And you know what? I really could have saved a whole bunch of time just using a brush. There's things that a brush does great and the things an airbrush does great.
And if you're using an airbrush, you're doing it because you're saving time. You're not base coating an army with a size 4 Wapple sable.
So that's what I've been using it for. That's how the Easterlings can get done so fast in the bolt action stuff.
Absolutely, you just use. It's a drive-by. You're spraying across an entire army, just bang paint there. That's your base coat, and then you pick each one up and you stick a brush in your hand.
Mm-hmm. It's like when I did my Primaris Marine, I put it on Instagram and people are going, "Oh wow, how did you brush that on so smooth? The base coat looks amazing." I said, "Airbrush, psh, done."
Yeah. And
if
you did 10 of them, then you'd have actually saved a lot of time.
Yeah, but it's just kind of like airbrushes, like putting paint in, cleaning it out, which would take seconds. So you just go, pss, 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 done, sorted. Don't need to do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you can do it with a brush and it's fine. It just takes longer. It just naturally takes longer.
Yeah, it doesn't work for me quite like that at the minute because my Infinity is spraying paint out of the cup rather than out of the needle.
Oh.
Out the nozzle end at the minute. So, it's that's.
Does it not sitting right? Because
I don't know.
The Infinity is like the Ultra, isn't it? Where the cup comes out. So
yeah,
it's not like a fixed.
Yeah, but I mean, there's something clogged in there. Even though I've soaked it, I've scrubbed it, I've poked it, I've taken all the clogs out of the air with a barrel. There must be something in the nozzle that's clogged in there because it's just firing back. In fact, I was doing this Predator head, and I got a face full of paint.
Nice.
Instead of it getting a face full of paint, I got a face full of paint, and I was not impressed with that.
Well, don't do what I did and leave your £80 airbrush in a solution of windowine and water for 2 weeks.
No, you
because
idiot.
It strips it. I haven't actually checked to see if it still works yet. Hardman's team got back to me and they said it's just a discoloration and the metal inside is weaker than they said it's more raw than the metal on the outside, the chroming.
Yeah.
So they said it's just a discoloration. It's just gone down to the base metal. It should be fine as long as it's smooth. It should spray. So I've got to check to see if that's fine. If it is, then no worries.
Yeah. You dickhead.
But it's the really weird thing is, it's cheaper to replace the actual main body of the airbrush than it is to buy a new nozzle and needle.
Yeah.
It's mental. But obviously they know that they can bend you over backwards because you need the nozzle and well, you need the main body, but they break easier.
Yeah. I mean, I've been through. I'm on my second set of needles and nozzles, and yeah, that was heartbreaking when I was cleaning it out. It was about 3 years ago, and the thing it fell out of the holder on the desk. It just slipped out of it and fell on the floor and just turned into a knitting, like a crochet hook.
Crochet hook, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I had one of those. It was a couple weeks ago that happened. It got yanked out of my hand, and it was one of the airbrushes that had no needle guard on it, so that needle was bent, and I went, screw it, just bent the needle back, and I've been painting with it ever since.
Well, I might try that actually for the next one. I didn't manage at the time. I mean, it's curled right over, so I've got to be really careful with it because it'll just snap off otherwise. But I did use it to clean out the new one, where all the primer had sort of just clogged up in front of the trigger. And so I looked through it, and I wasn't quite sure. Is that paint? Is that a rubber seal to stop too much air going through, or what is it? And everybody on the group chat said, no, that's just paint has dried in there. It's just shit. Scrape it out, stick an old needle through it. And I thought, yeah, I've kept my old needles.
Yeah,
I keep
I know.
everything.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
Oh no, I used to have a ritual of taking this whole stupid airbrush apart and cleaning all these different bits, and I was just using watercolors, which water, when it hits watercolor, just like cleans it out by itself. There was no reason to do any of that. And Ken from Badger said, yeah, Jim, you never needed to do that. You were taking a risk every time you take that stupid thing apart and try to put it back together. You are taking that chance that's the time you're going to bend that needle or damage something.
Yeah, there's I can't remember his name, but the owner of Badger. There's a few videos on YouTube where he talks about it, and they were asking about taking it apart, and he says you never really need to do it unless something actually properly goes wrong that you can't fix it without taking it apart. He was like, for cleaning, you don't need to. You just clean it, wash it around. And he was saying, if a lot of people, if they use like 60 psi, it'll just blow the shit out. So I thought, but yeah, I'm doing the same ritual. I'm like, ooh, it's my baby. I've got to clean it after using it once.
Yeah, I'm not that. I'm not that tidy with it.
Yeah, these days I'll use it for 8 hours or something like that, and I'll just spray rubbing alcohol through it, and all right, it's clean now. That's good. Now, of course, it gets used a little more frequently than most people's, I would guess.
I would expect
every
that,
6 months.
Yeah, mine's every time I need to wash my face.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it means I managed to pull out my old Badger single action siphon feed. Because I couldn't be bothered to carry on figuring out the troubleshooting on the Harder and Steenbeck, and so pulled out this old I think it's a 200N. I forget exactly what range it's from. A friend of mine gave it to me because he didn't need it anymore. And pretty much the whole of this Predator head is all of the spots, all of the detail on this was done in with a siphon feed single action, and I'm well impressed with what I've managed to do with this thing, just by screwing the end of it to force it to only have that one bit of pattern. it's almost like if you've seen any of Adam Savage's videos, he says you don't need a double action because they never, when he was at ILM building spaceships and God knows what else, they never used double action. They just use a single action.
I was at Gen Con this year. I had a few people say, well, I'm not convinced that I can do that second action, that I don't have the hand control to pull back on that trigger. It'll be too much or not enough. It'll just splatter all over. And I took a few different things. I took a miniature, a piece of terrain, and a vehicle. And I said, all I'm going to do is just press down on the trigger. I'm not going to do anything else. And we'll do all kinds of fun stuff on this. Basically, I held it closer or I held it farther away. And they said, wait a minute, that's all I need. If I want a big old spray, wide spray, I just hold it farther away. I said, yeah, that's kind of it. Mm-hmm. And if I need a tighter thing, I just hold it closer. I said, yeah, that's kind of it. And they said, oh, okay, because that was the one thing preventing them from getting an airbrush. Yeah. They had convinced themselves they could not use it. And I'm not sure why there is this almost like a market for making things too complex. It's like, you can't possibly do this unless you have maybe that's it. It's a lot of this, well, if you have our product, you can open that door, because otherwise it's impossible.
Yeah. And the Infinity is the same as the Ultra, isn't it? Apart from the back end?
The Infinity is the same backwards compatibility, I think, as the Evolution.
Evolution.
And the Ultra is slightly different because you can't change some of the front bits. It's not as backwards compatible, but I think you can use the same needles and nozzles. Yeah. But yeah, I think the Infinity and the Evolution, you can basically swap out parts.
Yeah, and I think the actual, because I tend to work with mine because I take the needle out to blow it through every now and then. I take the red back end off it, so I've never actually used the clicker on the back to which gives you the screw for the needle travel. So you're getting a fixed. When you pull back, you don't go all the way. You only go back a part of the way, so you can guarantee that it's going to be that size of line. I put it back on last week just to try that out, and because I needed to have this precise sort of little freckling on this Predator, and I didn't manage to use it because it spat in my face. But I think the Evolution doesn't have that, and the Infinity does, and that's the only difference, or the main difference. So essentially, I've been using. I bought an Infinity, and I've been using an Evolution.
Yeah.
Because actually, I've, over God knows what, the last 15 years, I've learnt to have enough control, for the most part, to get what I need done.
I think with like airbrushing, it's the same as like painting and anything else you do. There's always like airbrushing snobs, and it's like if you don't do it in a specific way. So if you're not doing the double action with the finesse at this PSI with this type of paint and all this type of stuff, you're doing it wrong, and you're an idiot. And people just need to realise there are things on airbrushes and there are things for paintbrushes, and there's certain that they put these things on to assist you.
Yeah.
It's there to help you. If there's some fancy pants on the internet saying, well, if you don't pull it back at the 10th degree at a certain angle, you're a knobhead. Well, okay, I'm a knobhead. Cheers. See you later.
Yeah. But you've achieved exactly the same effect, and in half the time. Yeah. 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 I mean, I remember hearing Larry sort of taking the piss out of Jim because he blasts everything out at 2,000 psi. And he's surprised that he hasn't exploded all his airbrushes at the pressure that you use. But I guess if it works, it works.
Well, yeah, when I went on this painting weekend with James Otero, he's the one that, was Artis Opus. Mm-hmm. People were asking him what PSI does he use on his compressor, and he said 60. And they looked at him and like, what? Isn't that far too high? And he goes, I don't know, it's just what it was when I started using it. I just got used to it.
Yeah.
That's just what it is.
Well, I've got to upgrade my my desktop compressor because it doesn't go up and down on with the regulator at all. I don't know what's wrong with it.
Is it your compressor the thing that they used on the Hubble satellite to send it up?
That's my sort of garage compressor. Yeah, that's the one I'm using at the minute for that you'd normally use for pneumatic power tools. That one's fine. It's just I've got to wear ear defenders to use it.
And everybody else in the street has to wear ear defenders.
And I can't paint after sort of 7 p.m. because the entire neighbourhood shakes. But yeah, my regular little sort of the desktop one with the small tank and it's just what kind of compressor is it? It's not an oil compressor. It's just a dry, regular sort of miniature thing. That now blows out at 1 atmosphere and nothing else, and you can't adjust it. I've put I've put 2 regulators on it. I've swapped them, and you turn it up, you turn it down. You can't get anything more powerful or less powerful. It just goes at that one pressure, and that's it done.
What's weird, I think I got used to the higher velocity pressures because of that stupid little pache. Even though it was this super fine thing, because it was an external needle, it was a physical mechanism that went back and forth with a little arm and everything. You actually had to run it at really high PSIs just to get that thing to turn.
Right.
It looked like a tiny little miniature hamster wheel type thing. So even though you were doing these really fine things, you had it at that high pressure, so that's probably how I just got used to it being like that. And I guess, too, it's what you're using it for. For me, it is a glorified priming tool. And since Ken makes 12 colors of primer, and now with the metal primer, you can even prime and color things with metal. And you can practically paint with just the primers.
I do like a metallic primer. Yeah, I've run out, but they're really handy.
And when you mix them with the ghost tints, now you can make any color metal, and some of it can be really, really bright. You take that plasma fluid or the purple or whatever, you mix it with that metallic, and you now have a metallic primer that is really, really juicy. So if you want to do some kind of Zinchi type thing or a Swanishi type thing, that actually can really help you get started with it. And what's the other? Oh, the metal medium from, what's it? Vallejo makes that.
Yes, I've got that. It's really good.
Someone had shown us a bottle of that years ago, and we thought, oh, that's kind of neat, but because of the stuff that we do, everyone asks us to do stuff with non-metallic, so we never get to paint with metallics. And once I started doing, especially things like the bolt action stuff, where you just kind of have to use a metallic, well, now taking the dark blue liner or blue and brown liner, mix it with a little bit of that metal medium, and now you have black steel. And if you mix a little more of the metal medium in there with it, now it starts to highlight it. When I started using the brighter clear paints with it, I could do any kind of almost like interference type stuff, or was it the color shifting?
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of do it by default, but the nice thing is you can also get the shading, because there's color shift paints out there that you can spray your Space Marine, and as long as he's spinning around on a little display thing, you'll notice the color shift.
Yeah.
But there's no shading. And if you try and do shading, you will wipe out the effect. But if you use the metal medium, you can actually get that effect, but now have that Space Marine shoulder pad also look like it is going light to dark, not just green to purple.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I've got one color shift paint, and I still haven't used it. It's one of the Green Stuff World.
It's tough because those are there's situational of a situation. It's like you have to have an airbrush, you have to do the gloss black primer,
Yeah.
and there needs to be something gigantic.
Yes, I haven't found anything yet that I want to put it on. And in the same way, I bought on the same shopping trip, I bought the Spiderweb serum, and I haven't dared to put that through my airbrush yet.
It goes through the airbrush fine, and it actually comes with a cleaner.
Yes, I bought the cleaner.
The thing is, those webs are not strong. It is for something that will never, ever move again. And don't put it by a fan, because the fan will blow those things off of there.
Right.
Which, again, makes it a teensy bit situational.
So you'd use it for dioramas?
For dioramas, I had even thought, okay, if I'm going to do, getting back on the Lord of the Rings, if I'm going to do Shelob's Lair, well, now that is pretty much the perfect thing for that, because it's terrain, and if the figures do mess up one of the spider webs, now you have a photography moment where literally Frodo is caught in the web.
Yeah.
And then you just rip it off and you spray it back on again. Because that's what I was thinking of doing that for, is for some type of fantasy terrain where it's a spider web, and actually at one point, since using it might destroy the webs anyway, just have the figures walk through the web.
Nice.
And just get some neat photos of figures stuck in an actual web. Because it comes off easy enough, and it sprays back on easy enough.
Fair enough. Yeah. I should. As soon as I fix my airbrush, I'll give it a run. Hopefully before Halloween, I might do it in the house.
Oh, yeah. Well, now you have one of those, some kind of there's a million different types of spray booth things, right?
Yeah, I've got one of those, yeah. I haven't actually switched it on yet.
Those actually, I didn't think they really did all that much until I either forgot to turn it on or something. All of a sudden, it's like, why am I standing in a cloud of dust? It was like there was a fog in the house. And I went, oh, yeah, that actually does make a difference.
Right. Yeah, I don't have anywhere to put the extractor, the outlet pipe, because the windows in my shed don't open. The door is too far away. So either what I need to do is get one of those. You can get to convert your tumble dryer, if you've got one of those vented tumble dryers. You can turn it into a condenser by sticking a pot of water on the end of it. So I might get one of those, or I need to drill a hole through the wall and stick the pipe through there so it vents out into the garden.
Actually, this has the same vent thing, and again, here it's either 100 degrees or 100 below zero. It's one of those two choices all year long. I said, screw it, it's not going outside. That pipe is long enough. I'm going to have it go 8-10 feet away from me, and I'm going to put a smaller fan right there to basically, whatever stuff comes out of it, just let it break up at the end. So
okay.
It's venting out away from me already, and that fan is now dispersing what's been vented away from me. And heck, if I really feel the need, I can even put another filter on the other end. So it's literally being filtered twice.
Yeah.
Instead of, again, venting it outside just was a bad idea on many levels. I said, screw that. I'm just going to vent it somewhere else and I'm just down in the basement. You're in the shed. As long as it's vented away from you and then dispersed, you're still a whole lot better than just sitting there in the cloud.
Yes, especially when I'm spraying varnishes and finish stuff. I remember getting very high spraying Future.
Ooh.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. What's the other? There's a new thing that I have to try. A buddy of mine, we were talking about those fall leaves before we started this up. He's actually dipping them in a solution of just some glycerin and water. And what it did is when he took it out of the vat, the color was definitely much brighter, definitely more well preserved, but the interesting thing was how flexible the leaves became.
Oh, really?
So I have tons of dried leaves here. They're flat as a pancake, and they have decent color, but if you were to try and fold them back on themselves like he did, they would just crumble into pieces.
Right.
He could actually, it was almost like he could take a piece of paper and roll it up.
Yeah, I think that's what they advise when you use like real leaves to put them in glycerin, just so that there's no chance of anything growing externally. It's all trapped.
Because I've had him on my figures for a long time. What's interesting is doing the historical things. You constantly have to make things just dirtier and grungier. Even the dead leaves off the tree, I still have to knock those down with some kind of a oil wash or something like that because they're just too bright. At that scale, especially in a historic, if it's a fantasy figure, it's a fantasy figure. It's a troll, it's a goblin, it's not real anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, because you've got to, if you're scaling down everything, you've got to scale down your saturation as well.
That was the biggest shock when I went to do the foliage on the first Bolt Action Army, and I did it the exact same way I'd done 1,000 times before. And I went, well, that just looks like crap. How have I been doing this for years on hundreds of thousands of figures and not noticed this? Because none of those figures was just a human in a French uniform with a helmet and a gun. Any one of us could don these uniforms and be this. We can't be a werewolf or a Tzeentch warlord, but we can be that guy.
Speak for yourself.
Well, yeah, there's... I
Yeah,
guess
that wasn't his dog earlier.
Yeah, that was me. I needed to go in the garden.
Yeah, then just do a little howling there.
Posh werewolf in London.
Hey, that was based on real life.
Yeah, I had to actually change the way I did my foliage. I had to completely change it to the point where I started painting grass tufts and painting the leaves and not even using the tufts that you buy anymore. Actually, if you have the static grass applicator and just some parchment paper and a few other things, you can make hundreds of grass tufts, shrub tufts, flower tufts in no time at all and save a boatload of money. I do not buy those anymore.
I need to get one of those static applicators then.
I think you can get some of them as cheap as maybe $30, one of the smaller ones, which is no big deal because you're just making tiny little grass tufts.
Yeah.
And the key is to get several different lengths of static grass, 2 mil, 4 mil, some 6, and vary up the color a little bit. And you can make your own tufts. They can be whatever size you need them to be. Because how many times have you run out of all the small ones or all the big ones?
I always cut the big ones up.
And even that, it's, well, what if you could make them the exact size you wanted them all to be? With the exact colors that you want instead of, well, okay, this winter tuft is kind of okay, it's kind of what I want, but this you can actually make the thing that you need, and the fun thing is making your own shrub tufts.
Right.
Because those get really expensive, and half the time I look to buy them, they're out of stock anyway. I think I waited like 3.5 years for purple flower tufts to be available on this one website, when I could have just made them all myself in a few minutes at a fraction of the price and as many as I needed.
Well, I had a similar thing. I ran out of brass tubing. So again, boring everybody with this Predator that I've been working on for God knows how long. I'm nearly finished with it. This week I fitted the dreadlocks to it. And they're long strips of foam, essentially, and they're painted in latex paint to give that sort of that glossy tube effect. But I've got to stick them to a vinyl mask, essentially. So I bought a bunch of lengths of thin brass rod and cut them up into the right length so I could actually pull these dreadlocks out and have them sit and flop down in the right kind of dynamic pose that I want. And I ran out. I mean, there were 30. I think it was about 30 dreadlocks, and I ran out after 20. So did I want to go out and buy another £5 worth of brass rod, or did I go to my wardrobe and take a wire coat hanger and cut that up? Which I should have done in the first place, because it's exactly the same thickness as the brass rod, and the coat hanger was probably worth 10p, and I got exactly the same out of that as £4 or £5 worth of branded brass rod.
Well, I know once we started to just grab leaves and branches off the ground, we were able to not only make far more natural-looking things, but I know somebody saw a picture of my Ardennes terrain board that I did for my early war bolt action. They said, wow, you must have spent hundreds of dollars on those trees. I said, I spent virtually nothing. It's leftover, that pink insulation foam, it's wood glue, plaster, and sticks, like actual sticks from trees. And you take the moss and you stretch it over those branches, just using some spray adhesive. Then you take all the same old flock that you would use, spray adhesive the moss, and you can now then get the texture of trees by sprinkling the flock over the top. And if it's not even the right color or shading you want, you just hit it with the airbrush. You can actually color your trees to get maybe a little more shading, maybe a little more brown here and there if it's too bright of a green, to tone it down, or if you need a little more yellowish green, just hit it with an airbrush. And it looks far more like a tree because, well, most of the things on it are natural, like the moss, the twigs.
Because what you've done is taken a tree and you've made a tree.
Who would have thought?
Imagine that, yeah.
That a part of a tree would really look like an actual tree. And well, it started with a terrain project where I was off-site and I was given... It was like some kind of bizarre live test version of MacGyver or something. Here's some sticks. Here's wood glue. Here's spray glue. Here's moss and flock. Go. Make a whole board worth of trees. Okay. And I took the tree. I carved the end of it to be like a point and shoved it down into the pink foam and had some plaster around that. And then just started spraying the snot out of it. And just started putting the moss on there. I said, well, that moss just looks like moss. That's terrible. What happened to spray stuff is really strong. What if I just sprayed the moss and dumped some of this flock on there? And my goodness, at 28 millimeter scale, it looked like thousands of tiny leaves.
Wow.
And then for winter terrain, we save all this loose leaf tea that my wife drinks. We scatter that underneath the trees, and who would have thought that actual leaves, no painting, no nothing, just scatter those under the tree where they would have fallen, looks like leaves falling under a tree.
Mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. And it's basically just sitting out there. Our grocery store, we live in the city, so our grocery store is a block and a half away. We usually walk there once or twice a day, at least, sometimes 3 times. If we forgot something. And we will just pick up sticks and things and we'll bring a second grocery bag just for leaves and sticks and rocks that we picked up. We used to sculpt rocks out of Sculpey, and they looked like sculpted blobs. And then Kathy said, wait a minute, all of these stupid little decorative rocks that we trip on the sidewalk every single day, we're taking these, and what if we just pressed them in the Sculpey or the epoxy sculpt and then either baked it and let it dry? Gee, now they look like actual natural rocks because we've used rocks.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to learn things the hard way, I guess.
Well, if you're going to synthesize something, synthesize it from reality. So you're taking a sample of rocks and making an impression of it and casting that into something else. As Ian said, don't use a piece of cork.
Yeah, I've seen people go so far as to buy there's a tree that is essentially cork, and they will buy big old lumps of this stuff. which is expensive when you want to do a whole terrain board with it.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like cork bark. It's what they use in vivariums for like reptiles and snakes.
Right.
That's what the heck it was.
Yeah, I used to have snakes, so I used to have some.
I know our latest goal is to fabricate a winter terrain board with one river that can be in 3 different states: ice-free, broken ice, and totally covered with ice. And the idea is to basically paint the river as flat as possible on a terrain board, and then get the plexiglass that on one side has the ripple stuff in it, the ripple texture, and the other side's flat. Maybe even spray a little bit of like shiny blue paint or whatever on the back side of it where the ripples are. And now you have what looks like a frozen over river. And if you break those pieces up, you now have sections of ice. And if you want to go even crazier and you're willing to actually scatter, just basically Christmas tree snow out on your board along the edges where the banks are, now people will that whole plexiglass look will go away, because they'll say, my God, there's ice floating on the river and there's snow on the ice. Their eye will be fooled by that, and this whole thing will have cost pennies on the dollar.
So you get some of these when they're doing like water and ice, and you'll get someone, they put this like material down, and then they'll spend hours doing all these little ripples and all these little things. If you watch Luke Tower, and he just gets his airbrush and sprays some liquid water with the airbrush, and it just makes ripples. He just goes. It's actually
Wow.
really cool.
Who does that?
Luke Towan, he's the one that Larry gets nerdgasms about his dioramas.
Oh, is that APS or something like
No,
that?
that's Luke. Luke Towan is an Australian guy that he just does like railway dioramas. And when he's ever doing a river and he wants to do like water, so say like in his last one he did the riverbed, but he put like a crocodile in it and then put liquid resin or water resin, and then he kind of got his airbrush and then he just went from one side to the other, spraying it in little bits while adding little bits more water on the top once it's dried, and it just looks like rippled water once it dries, because obviously it's clear.
He's blowing air through it rather than blowing. Yeah. Okay. So he's actually making ripples.
So instead of getting a little like a cocktail stick, and doing a meter's worth of like little ripples and all that type of stuff with material with a cocktail stick, he just gets his airbrush and sprays it.
I've seen others do that, and it looks more natural because it's kind of a natural thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
because if you look at a river, when there's a lot of ripples on the top, if it's not really rapid water, a lot of that is just the wind going over the river or over the lake. It's just causing the ripples, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it's what I noticed. I think she's UK based. It's Kathy Millot.
Yeah.
And she does a lot of the railroad stuff, and she showed that, and what was happening is you could get ripples within ripples, which is how water is. It's not just one cohesive ripples that only go in one direction. They're constantly bouncing off of things.
Yeah.
And you're able to do that so much easier by just taking the airbrush and shooting it from different directions. And
one of my favorite ones she did is where she made concrete, and when you got certain like roads and stuff, they have like cracks in. So for her road, she just used, is it like 1 millimeter like foam, craft foam?
Right.
And she just kind of like made little like cuts and scrapes with like different tools just to make the road crack, and then painted over it and stuff. It looked really good. She's got some really good stuff.
It's always after the demo is done, the tiny Cathys will come out, and usually the N scale Cathy gets like lost in the puddle, and the O scale Cathy is like stamping through. It's like, this is barely a puddle, and the N scale Cathy is drowning. That's actually, I saw her use it in one of her, it must have been a more recent one. She was using one of the GW technical paints to do the crackle effect, and she said, I've got this other stuff, but she's usually using MIG stuff or AK, that sort of thing, but she tried it, and and it seemed to work. So actually, then we went and got some now that we're going to a game store again, and I used it on some bolt-action desert bases, and it worked. It worked just the way she showed it on her thing. So
It's good
yeah.
stuff. The is it a Grelin Earth? Is the beige one?
There's that one, and then there's
The
two for
Mar-
Martian.
Martian Iron Earth is the red one. I don't know if they've got another one.
There's the Iron Crust, I guess, and
Ah,
one gives you more large crackle things, but I found that those actually will mix with oxide paste, so you can get a full range of cracks. You can get the super fine and the very large cracks. So that was fun. I hadn't used one of those at all, and none of the craft crackle paints seemed to do what I wanted. They were always too fine.
yeah.
They could never be, or they were just one. They were either gigantic or fine, and the fine stuff would be all right. Let's say you wanted to paint a mural on a wall behind a Space Marine or whatever, and you wanted that cracked paint look. That would work, but definitely not the cracked Earth appearance for sure.
No. Well, I found with the excuse me, the Grelin Earth and Martian Iron Earth, they're exactly the same. They're just the red one is tinted. That if you paint blobs, the larger the blob you paint, and then the thinner the paint you put down, you get a finer crack at the thinner end and a larger, more dynamic crack at the on a larger, thicker blob.
I was able to get that, well, partially I think because I saw hers, but it happened sort of by default because I had this, and the one thing they recommend is you have some kind of texture down before, and I had plenty because I had put down some new oxide paste, and I let it mix with the oxide paste, so now you actually have the sand and the crackle stuff literally mixing together. And that's where I got the smaller cracks, but that also had a little bit of sandy texture to them. So now the crack was blending into the sand. And that was nifty. I didn't think it would do that. I thought the two materials wouldn't really want to play together that nice.
Has anyone tried the spray can versions?
The spray can versions?
Yeah, if you go to like B&Q or whatever DIY shop you've got, like Plastic Coat do some, and you go to where the spray cans are, you actually get crackle, and on the lid it will show you what it should look like once you've sprayed it.
I have not tried that, no.
And then you can get some which are like gravel and grit, and you get all different types. I've just never used it. I was just wondering if either of you two have used it.
Yeah,
No, I'm going to have to try it.
we used some of the grit style cans when we were making our Barbarossa board because he did not want to have to deal with putting rocks and gravel across an entire 6x4 board. The thing is, though, that it's kind of nice, but you'll go through those real fast. Tends to be a pricey way of doing a terrain board. Yeah, it was. I think we went through 3 or 4 cans of the stuff.
And they're what, $10-15 a can?
Not cheap stuff. So I think after that we went back to rocks and gravel and wood glue because it was a whole lot cheaper. And actually now I use wood glue and plaster a lot because the plaster can be structural. I'm essentially making my own oxide paste, but now something that, again, doing an entire terrain board in oxide paste would cost $120. Which is only half the price of my new oil paint set, by the way. Oh, sorry, I couldn't resist that.
Killed him.
But the wood glue basically gives you the water that you need for your plaster mix, but it now makes your plaster like concrete.
Right.
Because
Do you mix in any isopropyl alcohol then to make it really, really solid?
I'm going to start doing that, and I'm also going to start. I saw somebody using, and I think even Kathy Millot mixes the alcohol with her glue so that it gets down into those when you're doing rubble. and she likes to use the cat litter, but she also likes to use the grout, tile grout.
Right.
And because she likes to do it like powder. When you think of fallen walls, we all do the rough parts, but it does actually get pulverized too. And she was using the alcohol to make sure that her glue got down into all those tiny little crevices. So that's something I'm going to have to do more of. I mean, we have tons of rubbing alcohol. That's what we use to clean every brush. So we have plenty of it.
Yeah, it seems to be good for pretty much everything, this stuff.
Yeah, isn't the alcohol meant to break up like the surface tension for the glue to then go in? Because would the glue just sit on the top otherwise? Is that what the actual alcohol is for?
That's what they said it, and I can tell because I've had to start making basically misters out of my glue, putting them in one of those kind of little misting type containers and watering down the glue.
Yeah.
But now your glue is going to take longer to dry, and the advantage of any kind of rubbing alcohol is it dries really fast. And now your glue is going to dry a little bit faster, and it will definitely get down into those crevices that otherwise it would just sit there on top. It's the reason why, the historical guys like to use, the oil washes, because they can do that panel line wash because the oil is so much thinner. And it does, water will sit on the edge of a dish. Oil will never do that. It'll just go straight down.
Yep.
And I guess the alcohol will let you do something like that. It's the wonder tool, and speaking of fake products that you charge way too much for, we were also going to make something called Schmindex.
Yes, I remember.
The greatest brush cleaner of all time, which is basically just rubbing alcohol in a jar.
Tinted blue.
Tinted blue, give it a fancy label, and sell it for at least $15 a jar.
Yeah.
Well, it has to be blue because you can't sell it in the EU without it being blue. Everything's got to be blue.
But 'cause I clean every single, while we've been talking here, I was cleaning out a couple of brushes with rubbing alcohol. And it gets it all the way, even underneath the ferrule. It gets everything. I love the stuff.
And it's cheap.
It is dirt freaking cheap. Actually, I use it as a painting material because you can take weathering powders, mix it with the rubbing alcohol, and they become like watercolors.
Nice.
Until they dry in about 15 seconds, and now they're a powder again.
Right.
Which you can manipulate. And that was cool when I made that little realization. I was able to do the whitewash effect on a tank like whitewash because I just really just put the powder on there, took the rubbing alcohol, and let the alcohol just wipe parts of it away. And until you seal it, it's not permanent whatsoever.
But you started with a liquid that you can paint on and push where you want, and then it's just back to powder.
Then it's just back to powder, and you can manipulate that because it just becomes a dust again. And when I wanted to do dusty effects on anything that's kind of desert related, well, I'd certainly do the same thing. I'll just waterize my powders and let it sink down into all those little crevices like you tend to see in those really dry environments.
Mm-hmm.
And you can sit there and struggle with a brush trying to smush the dry powder down in there. Or you can do it a much faster way and just let it soak down in there. And then once it's dry, you just rub away the excess. And then you can hit it with some kind of fixing material, whatever, and poof, you got yourself nice arid dust.
Nice. Do you spray the fixing medium, or do you or how do you apply that?
It kind of depends. Most of the time, I'll just take my tester's dull coat and spray it on there. because the powder's pretty. It's not really sitting on top so much, but if it's sitting on top, it's a nerve-wracking thing. But I will take the liquid fixers and then just try and paint it over the top. Although I'm also now starting to think of taking an airbrush that's an inexpensive thing that, well, I beat the crap out of all my airbrushes, and actually start to maybe spray the pigment fixer through that.
Yeah, because I'm always worried that with if I'm either spraying something or even if I'm applying it with a brush, that I'm going to just knock all the dust out of the way anyway.
The one thing actually, and the other thing is you can actually, I've even taken the liquid fixers and actually mixed it with the powder and painted with it the same way. It's just whatever, once it dries, then it is permanent. I mean, it is there, never to come off. So you can, I've even done a little bit of each. There's a little bit of the rubbing alcohol in there and some of the fixer. The trickiest part of the whole operation is that, of course, anything that's wet looks darker than it really is.
Right.
So you have to just, all right, here's what my powder looks like when it's dry. No matter how black it looks, it will return to sandy color. It will go back to its original form. And I have so many times not quite, I say, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't try to make it lighter. It will dry lighter. Even now, sometimes I'll forget because I see it be so dark. And I say, oh my gosh, that's not the right color. And sure enough, then it dries 10 times lighter than I wanted it to be. Because I couldn't convince myself that yes, it will dry not that long from now, and it's going to go back to what it originally should be looking like.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of, I guess you've got to put a lot of faith into certain products, don't you?
Oh, yeah. I've had this conversation with a lot of people, why so many people, they don't want to experiment. There's the obvious things where, they get comfortable with the method. Why would I want to try something new? Then there's the other faction that just, they would screw it up. And to me, I would never be able to do any of the things I'm doing, even like today. Right now, while we are talking, there's stuff that I would never be able to do now if I had at some point said, screw it, I'm just going to try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And sometimes when it doesn't work, it wasn't that it was the wrong thing, it was the wrong task. It worked great for this other thing.
Yeah.
But now I know it doesn't work for this. I had to do a tank painting demo last year, and none of the stuff I needed was there. I mean, absolutely nothing was there. And I said, all right, guys, we're calling it audible here. We're going to change the whole game. Everybody come up here. Get out of those chairs. Sit around me. And we're going to do 3 hours of just experiments. Stuff that I've wanted to try for the last 3 to 8 months. Never had the time. You're going to see it now. And they all said, well, what if it doesn't work? And I said, well, now 10 people will know it doesn't work instead of 1. And he said, are you sure you want to do that? I mean, because there's witnesses here. And I'm like, yes, exactly. And just started slapping stuff on this vehicle. Say, I have no idea if this is going to work. Let's try it. And then people started adding to the experiments. They said, hey, Jim, try this too. And we tried it. And we said, oh, yes, that works too. And I know I showed him at a certain point with the craft brushes, when they get too far gone, I'll chop off about half of the bristles and make it a spatter brush or a stipple brush. Mm-hmm. And I said, guys, one of my favorite things is to put static grass in my mud mix and shove that in the treads. I said, I'm sorry, I don't have any static grass. And one guy says, yes, you do. He says, remember those bristles you chopped off that brush?
Yes.
Are those any different than static grass? I said, we're going to find out. Sure enough, shoved it in the mud mix that we made, which was, again, experimental mix. And the 9 of us came up with a bunch of different ideas. And I do those techniques today. A year and a half later. Stuff that I had no idea if it was going to work. And it's like, well, we can either all just sit here with our thumbs in our proverbial orifice, or we can try this stuff. And all of them came out of the class. They said, well, one thing's for sure. I never have justification for not trying something, ever. You were willing to try all of this in front of an audience and look very foolish, which means now I have to try stuff myself.
Yeah, I don't get this concept of that these human beings seem to have of pride, of feeling stupid about failing in front of other people, or doing something and not showing off, not showing what they're doing because it might not be good enough or it might not work well enough. I don't get that.
I think it's just social pressure. We live in a society now where everything has to be perfect. Everybody has to be good at everything. And if you're not good at everything, then there's this perceived thing that you're not worthy or you're not good enough. That's mostly what it is. I mean, for me, I couldn't give a shit if I got something wrong. The reason why I don't experiment as much as I can is because of time. If for say argument's sake, I'm trying to paint something, and I was to experiment and it didn't work, and if I've only got like say 3 or 4 hours a week to paint, and I've spent 3 hours doing something that doesn't work, to me that's almost like a week's painting that's wasted. And although it technically isn't, because I've learned that, you know, I haven't failed to make a light bulb 10,000 times. I've just worked out how not to make one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like for some people, you just don't have that time to experiment, or you don't have that perceived time to experiment. You just want to get better at something and know something that works and do it.
Yeah, no, I kind of get that. But it's... like Jim just said, you know, the people have got no excuse not to, or because they were worried about doing it beforehand because they weren't sure if they'd get it right, or it would fuck something up, or it would. And it's like, if you take out of the equation of what you've just said about, yes, I totally get that, of not wasting the time you've got. You only have 8 hours a week of hobby time, and you don't want to spend half of that trying new stuff out. You want to just crack on and get stuff done. That's valid. But for anybody who's just scared of doing it in case it goes wrong, you fell over when you were a kid, right? Did you give up walking because in case you fell over again?
But that's instinct, though, isn't it?
But everything's instinct, you know.
Oh yeah. But it's kind of like if you fall over as a kid, you don't realise that you're falling over to learn, or you're falling over, and people are going to like perceive as ridicule you, which is what a lot of people worry about in modern society. It's if they do something wrong, or if they do something that doesn't work, or like me, if I sculpt, I'm learning to sculpt. I'm trying to sculpt the head. If I sculpt the head and it looks like sloth, some people are going to be scared that people are going to go, it looks shit. And that's mostly what it is. People just don't want to look stupid. They don't want to look as if they can't do something.
It's the hardest thing people have with the way I do things, because 80% of the time when I'm painting, that thing looks worse than ass. I mean, it just looks horrible. And people will say there's like this bizarre thing that happens in the last 15% of it where it completely transforms exactly into what it was supposed to be. And that is, now of course, the 2D training, that's how your painting was supposed to go. It was supposed to look like literally nothing until that last portion. Mm-hmm. Because you're building a skyscraper, you're starting with concrete and steel, then you're adding your drywall, then you're adding paint. You're not adding glass onto the steel girders. You're doing the other stuff first. And some of the painting methods, they are trying to actually just stick the pictures on the wall when there's no wall. Like, the reason why I paint the whole figure all at once is we used to paint Space Marines and just paint the face and then paint everything else around it. Half the time hitting it with our brush, getting mad. Or the face now, it's like, wait a minute, why does that flesh tone not look the way I painted it? Oh, yes, because there's dark blue around it now instead of white or black or whatever the primer color was.
Yeah.
So, you know, in 2D painting, you are taught cover that white surface or whatever the color of the paper or canvas is. You cover that up as fast as you can. and block in things. And people are afraid to do that, understandably, because it looks horrible. Oh, I mean, these trolls that you can't see because, hey, the wonders of radio, these things looked like ass as of 4 o'clock this morning when I was last painting on them. But now I'm starting to do that sort of final 20, 15%, and it's like they are just emerging like a 3D printer, out of the resin pool.
Nice.
But you
it's
have
nice
to
when you get
know
to
what's
that
going to
stage.
happen.
It's funny, like when I start a new miniature, obviously it looks as it does when it's been primed in grey, and it looks. I actually quite like the way things look in just one tone of grey. If you've lit it nicely, it just looks like it looks like a render, and I quite like that. And then you start putting colours on it, and then it looks like shit for ages, and for ages, and. I love that moment where it suddenly starts to look as good with the colour on it as it did with just primer.
Yep. That's now that I do the color shaded primer type thing, there is that kind of moment where it looks like it has all these lights and darks and even tones of color from just the primer, and then you're literally just wiping that all out and sort of rebuilding it again. But I suppose with more precision.
Maybe a little more precision, yeah.
But people, they get really... when I put them through the shaded base coat class, that's why I used to call them veterans, and I started just calling them survivors. Because they come in there, everything is taken away. Their paints, their brushes, their pride, their dignity, it's all gone. It's stripped away, and they're given these 5 paint colors and the sad little 35-cent brush, and that's it. And they just sit there with this look of shock and horror. And at a certain point, I actually even take the brushes away, and they actually have to paint with their fingers. It is just, it's, some might almost refer to it as some kind of abuse, but it's, hey, they're my chew toys. When they're in that classroom, I get to munch on them as much as I want. But yeah,
they paid for that pleasure.
They paid. What's the first thing a dog tries to do with that squeaky toy? Rip out the squeaker. And that's what I try and do with the shaded base coat thing, is rip out that squeaker of timidity and hesitancy, and just tell them, like, yeah, I know you haven't had 10 years of art training, but really it's way simpler than I made it. That's why I almost had to give up painting, because I made it too complicated in my head. Could not figure out, wait a minute, so a more saturated cool color violates that whole thing of warm color comes forward, cool color recedes. Almost had to stop painting because I couldn't figure that out. And then I switched mediums. I went to acrylics instead of watercolor, and it's, this is all it was? This is the thing I couldn't understand for 4 years?
Right.
And I'll just give people paints, and I say, look, here, take this gray, or take this gray, take that yellow, mix the two of them together in different proportions. Just see what you get. And they'll say, damn, look at this. This is like the coolest green I've ever seen. And like, yeah, you just mixed green. You just mixed the color. And they'll say, you know what, take that maiden flesh. It's like an off-white. And then mix what you've mixed with that. And like, wow, look at this. I've made like 20 colors in 30 seconds, and I've never mixed a color before. Mm-hmm. But when you present them with these formulas, it was like somebody trying to teach me how to create apps. If they give me nothing but jargon and make it complicated, I'll never do it. But if someone else come along and say, look, Jim, it's really just this, and makes it something that I can understand, I'll learn it way faster, way less painfully, hopefully.
Well, it seems to me that a lot of people, when they're learning stuff, or the people that are teaching, want to show off that they're really good at what they're doing. And so they'll try and blind everybody with science. So they'll make it sound so much more complicated than it needs to be, and so much more complicated than it actually is, just to sort of big themselves up and say, hey, I've spent all this time learning this, and you guys you're not going to learn everything that I know in the next 10 minutes.
Some people, they'll actually say, well, Jim, are you seriously trying to say, the stuff that you've taken 35 years to learn is that simple, I say, yeah, I'm just a little more thick-headed than most.
See, I want to take one of your classes because it sounds like you've got the right idea of how to get things across.
Because I see there are people that actually, they'll say, I started painting again because I convinced myself that I couldn't paint. I've watched people do it, even in a conversation. I've literally seen themselves convince themselves they can't do it. And just like any guy who's good at any sport, they usually have to tell themselves, yeah, that corner kick, I can make this. Or, that bowler, I'm not sure I'm ever going to make contact with but I can do it. I'm gonna get an over or whatever. I'm gonna do that thing. I can do it. As soon as you say to yourself, I'm not sure I can, you're already in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's not that far to convince yourself that you can't, because if you don't try it, then there's no way you can fail something you don't try.
Yeah, I'm having the same exact conversation with my 7-year-old. Not right now because he's asleep, thank God. But he's been going through one of the Kids Art Hub YouTube channels, and it's a guy on this channel sits down with a kid and they draw an emoji or a cartoon character or a caricature of something, and it's just a 2D sketch and then colour it in. And he's teaching these kids. Most of them are around sort of 10 years old, and they've got better hand-eye coordination than my 6-year-old, now 7, only just 7. And he throws... he flipped a table the other day because he got pissed off with something that he couldn't do. And he'll sit there and say, this is too hard, and he'll work himself up into this frenzy of, I can't do anything, to the point where he completely melts down. And so, once I've brought him back into the real world from this fucking vortex that he puts himself in, and sit down with him and just say, this is all you need to do. You just were looking at it from a complicated way, and now just simplify what you're thinking of. Like today, he had a problem with a hand. I can't draw hands. If you look at any of my sketches, hands and eyes are my worst thing that I do. And I said, look at what you've got there. That bit's part of the wrist. That bit's the fat bit on your hand. And then look, the fingers go straight down. And so he did that, and he said, but it still looks like shit. Not literally, but... I said, yeah, but look, if you extend this line up, you've made your fingers actually look like fingers. Oh, well, that's all I wanted to do. Yeah, and it was literally 3 millimeters of pencil, of making a line just longer, and it turned it from looking like a piece of crap to looking like a hand. And it was getting him out of that mindset of, I can't do this is too fucking hard. I'm going to throw a chair into the TV.
He's almost ready for wargaming at that point.
Oh God, he's ready for rage quitting. Yeah. Yeah, and he's only just 7. God.
But that's how society is now, though, isn't it? You've got to be good at everything. Automatically, there's no patience to learn anything.
Yeah, you've got to be good at it straight away, and I don't know where he's got this from, because he certainly hasn't got it from me. Yes, I'm perfect at everything I do, but I've told him I'm perfect at everything I do because I've had 40-odd years of doing it, and I was shit when I started, and for a lot of things, yes, I still am, except that I sell it as perfect.
I know one of the things that it was usually in the live classes, but now I try to even include it in every video that I do, where it's not that complicated. It is really not that hard of a thing. And yes, you can screw up. It's okay. You can mess up. And also, too, it's only just this. And I don't throw out the jargon. I don't say, you know what, we're going to do non-metallic metals. Because as soon as you do that, people's sphincters just tighten up, and it's like a dog whistle.
Mine just did.
Yeah. If you put them through something, and then you say, oh, you realize you just did non-metallic metal there, then they might be shocked, but they didn't get a chance to work themselves into that fear frenzy kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, look, you just kind of did. I'll trick them into doing object source lighting. They have no idea. They don't really realize they just did it, or it's so not scary, they don't realize that they've just done it. And you reveal to them afterwards, it's like, yeah, you just successfully did that thing you were convinced you could never do. Like, but that was easy. And I said, yep.
Yeah, it's changing your mindset, changing your perception of what you're doing. And I think that's pretty much for everything you do, isn't it?
Because to me, and I try to put myself in their place, and I try to, all of the video editing stuff and trying to use things like XSplit and OBS, it makes you just want to scream.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's constantly changing. They just did another update today, which means potentially the next time I open it, there's going to be something I want to do, and I won't be able to do it. Because so the last 3 months, I'm now in my 10th permutation of XSplit. So it's that I can understand how people can get kind of nerve-wracking about this. That it is, yes, it can be a very frustrating, scary thing. And the time element, too, people will say, well, Jim, you do this for a living. Of course you have to save time. And I said, we both have to save time just for different reasons. Like, you only get 3 hours a week, maybe. I'll ask people, how many hours a week do you get to paint? And 1 to 3 hours is a general thing that I hear. I say, which one of us needs to paint fast? You guys do. Because I get 20 hours a day, 7 days a week to paint. You guys get 3 hours maybe a week. You have to maximize that time. And they'll say, oh, yeah, that's true. So
you want to paint fast because you want to get through your stuff and get paid more. And, yeah, they want to paint faster and so they can get something done.
I assume you also have a break on Christmas Day and you only paint for 19 hours.
Yeah, 18 and a half. Yeah. I just kind of get lazy a little bit on Christmas there.
You got to have that dessert half an hour.
And I have painted on Christmas and Thanksgiving. Yeah, I've definitely done that.
But did you paint your own stuff or did you paint commission stuff?
Oh, it was never my own stuff. It's only recently that I've been able to sort of blend the two together. Now that I'm doing the videos. So, like, for the army painting videos, well, what better way to show people army painting than by making my own armies and tackling something different? Like, the whole point of the Easterlings was, all right, for most other people, it would be, how do you maybe match figures that you might have painted years ago? Here, I have to match something that not only did I paint years ago, it's gone. I don't even have it anymore. So this is kind of to help those folks that want to maybe add to an old army that they haven't touched in a while. The Lord of the Army of the Dead is to show them how to use fluorescent paints and heavy weathering combined together to make ethereal dead things that look rusted. But now, at the end of it, I'll have an army again. So it's work things that I can then use, and then the terrain videos that I'll then be playing on and making the battle report videos. Basically, when you make what is fun your work, then you can do fun things.
Well, that's the nice way of going about it, yeah. Because sometimes when you make your fun thing your work, your fun thing suddenly becomes not fun.
That's about 99% of the human race, I think, because I've known people, well, they maybe got jobs at GW or something like that, and they said, the last thing I ever wanted to see was a miniature or a dice. Yeah, they said it ruined the hobby for me. because it became work.
Yeah. Yeah, gynecologists taking their work home with them, it's not...
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like fun anymore.
Hey, those rubber gloves that I use for airbrushing and for oil painting, well, there's that side job there.
It's like when you've got a girlfriend and then you get married and you're like, I used to like you.
Well, actually, Kathy technically is the person that got me started painting miniatures. I had some Blood Bowl figures here, and she said, well, you're not painting those. I said, yeah, I'm not painting. And she said, well, here, I'm just going to take our acrylic paint that we're using for 2D art, and you mind if I paint them? I said, have at it. Go ahead. And she was having a blast. And I said, well, hey, do you mind if I just sit down? She said, well, the miniatures were just sitting here. And she uttered the phrase, well, my brother always said you got to watch out because miniatures can be addictive. And, of course, I said, they're just stupid little miniatures. Who the hell cares? And, well, 18 years later, guess what?
You're still
trying to decide.
They are more addictive than they ever were.
Yeah, that's the reason why most of us that don't do it for a job have more miniatures than we'll ever actually paint.
Because I think at this point, in addition to everything else, there's the 17 bolt-action armies, several terrain tables, now 4 or 5 bolt-action armies, and then there's the Song of Ice and Fire stuff. So, yeah. And then there's making the battle reports. That's been the most fun thing. I did pictorial battle reports for years, but doing the video reports has been a lot of fun. It's kind of a pain in the rear end, but it's a lot of fun.
You're playing against yourself, though, aren't you?
Yeah, actually, years ago, I really wanted to learn Blood Bowl, not the game, but all of the different races. At that time, there was 20 of them. Mm-hmm. So I actually created a league of 20 teams and just played them all against each other. And boy, I learned how every single race worked. And every time I said, there is no way I can stop this. This is going to be a touchdown. Sure enough, on the very next turn, not only has the other side knocked the ball out, but they're going the other way down the field. I said, well, wait a minute. I thought I had this set. What the hell happened? And I've been doing that with bolt action. As it turns out, when you already know what you're going to do, there is no surprising the opponent. Half the time when you win a game, it's because you just got lucky because the other guy forgot something that you could do or that he might have done, or you just fooled him. Well, you can't fool yourself. You know exactly what you're doing. That means you have to come up with a much better plan to succeed. You have to make it as foolproof as possible, which means in your head, crunching all the numbers. It's like playing chess against yourself. You already know what you're going to do, but you have to now think 3, 4, 7 moves in advance because you already know what's going to happen. It's like one of those Chinese martial arts movies where the guys just stare at each other and the fight happens in their heads.
Yeah. But the other good thing is that you guarantee to win at the end.
Guaranteed to win and guaranteed to lose.
Yeah, but you don't talk about that bit.
Well, it's because after the battle reports end, their awards are given out to certain figures that have done extraordinary things during the game, and as you're doing this, you're like, well, okay, it wasn't really him. That was me. I should give myself the award. Oh, but then I was also the idiot that moved that vehicle over there and got it shot. But I was also the guy that made the brilliant plan to put that thing on ambush and wait for that vehicle. But wait a minute, you already knew that was there. Because there's so many times when I look back at games, they were won or lost because the other person wasn't really focusing, or they just didn't know you could do a certain thing. So if tomorrow I go do the battle report with Roy, instead of us just playing a game where we're silent and he moves his stuff and I move my stuff and we roll dice, as Roy is doing his stuff, I'll say, okay, Roy, here's what I'm going to do. If you move there, this is what I'm going to do to respond. I want him to know what my response is, so that he comes up with a better response, but he helps me come up with a better plan to stop him, which we will then discuss and tell him how to break that plan. And in the 3 games we've played, the advancement of the 2 of us is light years ahead. If we had played 20 games of just standard, I try to kick your ass, you try to kick mine, and we never say a word, he's also enjoyed it a lot more, because we'll literally just walk away from the table. We're not on one side or the other. We'll both be next to each other, and we'll say, okay, we'll literally say, what should we do with these guys, even though it's his army or mine? Mm-hmm. And the 2 of us will say, all right, this makes sense, but wait a minute, this is the objective of the game. This doesn't make sense. Or, well, wait a second, don't forget that's over there. So there's not the gotcha moments, which just piss you off and make you want to play that much less. So we're kind of removing the things that are irritating. It also, takes the sting out of defeat, because each side has contributed to victory.
So, I mean, it sounds like it's less of a battle report than a breakdown of tactics. It's almost like it's a how the sausage is made of how to play this game, how to get better at it, rather than just seeing the narrative play out.
And when we do these, most people say that, geez, it's playing out like a movie, because many times, especially with the ones that we do, we don't mention who rolled what, who did what. We'll put it in terms of a story. And people love that, because what is it? Nobody wants to hear about your role-playing character. Don't ever tell people about your role-playing character, because nobody gives a damn.
Right.
Nobody also gives a damn that you won a game of bolt action because nobody saw your Katusha coming. Nobody cares. But what they do care about is the crazy story of Commissar Royetsky and how he died and then was replaced by Commissar Albertovsky, who was then replaced by another who died, and they love seeing that. They love seeing the story, the cinema. It's a cinematic game, for crying out loud. Make it more cinematic and less dull. Nobody cares that you roll 10 sixes in a row. But what people do care about is, what was your thought process, and how did you work your way out of maybe that really bad situation?
Yeah, because if you look at a lot of battle reports out there, most of the comments or what people say is, you forgot to do this, you left these over there and stuff. So, but if you're talking with each other about it, then you can properly formulate a plan. It takes away the focus on what the rules definitely are, and more on what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Because there are times where why did you move that there? Thinking, what are you thinking? And I'll just say, here's what my thought process was, because here's the things that you can potentially do, and he's much newer to the game also, so to be able to do battle reports and learn the game, I must have watched at least 70 or 80 battle reports. This is a person who hadn't even played 2nd edition. That's a recipe for disaster. And when you have someone who's literally training themselves and another person who's never played the game. So it's hyper advanced where he's at in the game, and it's advanced me too. As far as I see it, there's less frustration, it's more fun, and we're each advancing how we play 1,000,000 times faster. Because I've played the other way in the past, like when you used to do Lord of the Rings, and if you won, okay, yeah, you were sort of satisfied that you won, but now you were feeling kind of guilty because the other person was not happy. And most of the time, you pulled some little dirty trick on them, and that got you the victory that day. Congratulations. It'll never work again. But can you make your strategy sound enough by literally telling that here's what's coming? Like the old days, I'm throwing you a fastball, and here's where it's coming. Hit it if you can. That means you got to throw a damn good fastball. some kind of movement on it. If you are telling the other person what is coming. Again, I've seen the other ones where it is more of a it's all about the victory. It doesn't last very long. It just kind of gets boring. It's why am I watching two guys rolling dice? Why should I even care about this?
Yes, I don't play anymore, but when I did play, war games and stuff, there was nothing more frustrating than knowing you lost because you forgot to do something because you're trying to work out everything that this person might possibly do. But if someone tells you and goes, right, if you do this, I'm going to do this, then you can go, do I have anything that can actually do that? Can I stop him in any way? Where can I go? It is really frustrating just to lose because you forget to do something.
And I think it's part of it happened because one of the guy that I played Lord of the Rings with, because of the diabetes medication, whatever the medication was, it kind of nuked his short-term memory. So that was a pervasive thing. I mean, that was because he was going to forget, and it would really build up the frustration because the same things would happen game after game. And he couldn't understand why, and it's because I remember everything from the very first game we played 10 years ago. And I'm like, he did that once, he will never do it again. But for him, it's like the first game every time. So I think that's another portion there, too. I just saw how frustrated he got to the point where he just was having no enjoyment whatsoever. As that is not the point of this. That is not, well, maybe for some people it is, but that wasn't the point for me. So then they just started to do more conversation about it and treat it like we were all both moving pieces around and trying to just, okay, what is the best way to solve this problem?
See, that's kind of, I fall into that group because when I was working at a college, you get free tests. So I did a dyslexic test. And what people don't realise is dyslexia also incorporates your short-term memory and your ability to work out puzzles. That's also incorporated in what they do in the dyslexia test. So my reading and writing is fine, I'm above average, whatever it is. But when it came to short-term memory, if you gave me more than two things to remember, I'd forget at least one of them. Because my brain just doesn't work in that way where I can continuously remember small amounts of detail, small amount of things. So, I can understand why when you're wargaming, when you've got that person moves that unit, that person moves that unit, he's moved him over there, he's moved him there, you've got him coming there, you've got that, and then you've got all your rules and all your bits as well. I'm just going to forget.
Yeah, especially, when you're looking at 40k, I think it's been simplified a lot now in 8th edition, but in 7th, it was just a stack of rules on top of a stack of rules on top of a stack of rules. And then tweaked and fixed and tweaked and fixed, and it was just this behemoth of God knows what you're doing. And I think that's it has to be why they pared it right down for 8th.
It was,
and that's why I haven't played since 6th.
If it was a piece of software, it would be Internet Explorer.
Oh Christ!
That's what it was like. It
Yeah.
was just bloated, bogged down, full of shite you didn't need.
Yeah.
So no one ever used it.
Exactly.
I think the last game of 40k I played, it was at a tournament. It might have been 6th edition then. I never played 7th or 8th.
Yeah, I played one game of 6th. I didn't play 7th. And I think I've played a beginner's guide for 8th, and that's it so far.
Yeah, I think was it 5th I played? Might have been 5th, and then I didn't play, and then I think I played 2 or 3 of 8th, but I just don't have the time anymore. Toddlers, right, and a wife. I mean, what you're gonna and work? What you're gonna do?
Well, teach the toddler to roll dice and get the wife to.
He'd probably eat it.
Oh yeah, I suppose.
He's at that stage, where he's 21 months. Doesn't eat everything now, but still kind of, if you take him out in the garden, you can play, and he'll run around, and we've got loads of pebbles in the garden, so he'll pick him up and he'll take him to you. But every now and again he goes and it's like putting it towards his mouth, and then you go in slow motion to like slap him in the slap his hand.
Slap his face away from, yeah.
And like stop him eating the leaves or the sticks.
Or the
so yeah, the dice, he's probably going to eat it.
Well, he might crap out a 6.
And that's it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to wait a couple of days, but...
If my life risk depended on it, it would be like double ones. Snake eyes.
I think that was the other reason that I had to change how the game was played, because people have bought me those, bricks of 36 dice or whatever, saying, "Oh, Jim, you need new dice. You just roll so horribly. Here's brand new dice. Roll them, and I'll roll 20 of them, and there'll be 18 ones and a couple of 2s." And they'll be like, "What the hell did you do? Those were brand new. How did you destroy them already?" It's like, that's what I can do to dice. So it can't be about the dice or anything like that. It's got to be about something else.
Of course, somebody's going to come up with the idea that it's like Wimbledon, new balls, please. It's the dice have run out of air; they don't have enough bounce in them anymore.
Yeah.
You've got to have new dice.
It's more wrist action.
Yeah. Or did they just buy you a 36 weighted dice?
Well, given the fact that nobody will let me touch their dice whatsoever, I would think there is some disease that I have that can be directly translated to dice.
Diceitis.
Yeah. My kids have got that.
Diceitis.
Yeah, especially the table flipping one. Every time he throws the dice, we tried some Age of Sigmar this summer and a bit of, as I said earlier, Lord of the Rings, and he wasn't having any of it because the dice just weren't falling for him. And it all hit the fan.
I suppose that was the other reason for the solo play, because the guy who rolls nothing but ones is the guy rolling the dice for both sides.
So at least you're evenly matched.
You would think. You would think.
Or do you actually have a good side of the board now?
Well, actually, there was one battle report where it was going so horribly wrong for one side. I thought, my goodness, is this going to be like one of those battle reports I go to see? It's a 3-hour game, but the timestamp says it took 20 minutes to play. And that's where you go, somebody had some foobar with their dice rolls. And I'm like, is this going to be one of those that I spent hours setting this up to have a game that's going to basically be over by the second turn? And this is potentially an 8-turn game.
Right.
And I said, this would be most unfortunate. And then me kicked in for the other side. And then it all went horribly wrong for them. So I was thinking, wow, is this going to be the one time where I only just voodoo myself instead of just... No, but I ended up sucking the dice rolls for both sides. And what should have been a certain easy victory for one side nearly turned into a tragic loss. Sort of based just on how dramatically the roles flipped. There wasn't a lot of difference in the strategy because the objectives were super obvious from the start of the game. It's one of these things, it's a sectors type thing, and you control this sector, it's worth this many points, these other ones are worth less, they're easier to hold, and at one point the Germans had a 19-2 lead by turn 3, and I went, well, this, you only need to win by 2, so this might not work out too well. Then all of a sudden, French gun, I don't know if they had called in airstrikes or nuclear bombs or something, but Germans just started dying everywhere. And that 19-2 lead ended up being a 14-12 nail-biter. Because the game went a 7th turn, it went an 8th turn. Had it ended at 6, Germans would have had their crushing victory. But because the game went longer, they were now just sitting ducks in these sectors. And this rain of ruin came down on their heads, and it's like, oof, ouch, there's another squad gone. So that's not only -3 victory points for them, but it's +1 for the French. And this started happening. You're subtracting from one, adding to the other, subtracting. And then the French is like, well, now we can start moving. There's no Germans there. Let's go. And I was like, are the French actually? And it came down to one guy. We named him Hans. He was literally the last survivor. There was nothing but dead bodies around him. And the fact that he survived and managed to take out one attaché to an officer, it was survivor versus survivor, and he won. That is the only thing that prevented a German loss. And to this day, he still walks around with his Iron Cross out on the board. There's a little red and black Iron Cross that follows him around wherever he goes. And I think he's fought in 4 or 5 games. Now he's actually a hero in another game. Once again, being the only survivor. He was leading this charge across a river in these rubber boats, and pretty much everyone else died except for him. Now, when Rich and I did our Lord of the Rings game, there was a Gondor captain who got named Tony for some reason. He was also the lone survivor in every game. We weren't sure. It's like, well, was he hiding somewhere while everybody else did the heroic charges, and that's why Tony managed to live every game? Was he heroic or just smart? Did he find himself a safer place to be?
We should put Tony and Hans in a different game together and see how they fare.
Oh, the contest of survivors. Tony versus Hans. In this corner from the land of Numenor, the descendants of Numenor, we have Gondor Captain Tony. And he just kind of clapping his armor and then falls over something and then hides somewhere. And then over here we have the bravest of the Wehrmacht. It's Hans himself. And he just sort of comes forward behind a shield of 30 guys. That's how he survives every single game.
That would be a weird game, but I'd watch it.
That would be an interesting crossing of the systems there. What is more powerful, the Gondorian sword or the MG-34 machine gun?
Of course, Tony has to play with Lord of the Rings rules, and Hans gets to play with bolt action rules.
Ooh, that could be really bad for Hans. That could be really bad. Well, combat in bolt action is sudden and final.
Right.
Because it's not one of these things where, a couple of guys died. We just keep fighting every turn. Maybe a couple of more. No, you keep fighting till one side is gone. And if you go in there and you flub your rolls on that first time around and the other guy just kills one more of your guys, your whole squad is dead.
Right.
I have seen
I've never played it.
I've had it happen to me, and I've had done it to other people, where a squad of 10 assault veterans runs up to an artillery piece, shucks all the rolls, the artillery piece kills one guy, the big squad of assault is all dead. It's gone. Killed by an artillery team with rulers and binoculars. They take out that one measuring stick and just whip the guys with it. Because apparently that works much better than, bayonets. Feel the power of my rangefinder. Which, maybe they were just darn afeared of that rangefinder. I don't know. But yeah, I've my very first game of bolt action, I tried to assault an artillery crew, and that didn't go so well. And I'm like, well, there must be... We looked over the rules, and it's like, nope, you're just dead. It's like, well, that sucked. So yeah, combat there is no... Well, we'll pile into combat after the first couple of guys die, and we'll just grind away for the next 4, 5, 6 turns. It's like, nope. It keeps going till everybody is dead on one side.
Okay.
And it can happen just in moments. It's just you turn around, and what should never have died is now dead.
Well, it sounds like I'll when I've got more room, eventually I'll have to try out some of these other systems.
To me, what's interesting with bolt action is that you and I could play for an hour and a half and nothing is dead on either side. Nothing has been killed, but yet my entire army is so pinned that you can literally just march around the battlefield at will. There's nothing I can do to you. My guys are literally, they have wet themselves in the foxhole and they're just cowering in their own urine.
Sounds like fun.
Sounds like fun. And then you put a few more pins on them and they say, you know what? Oh, look at this, a shopping list. I forgot to go get milk at the store. Sorry, guys, gotta go. And they'll just leave the field. You can have a 10-man squad with no casualties, and yet they've been shot at so much, they're like, oh, there's a safer place to be than this. I'm sure there is. You know what? Again, I think I left the campfire going back at the site. That's dangerous. We'd have a forest fire. We got to leave the battle. We'll be back like 2 days from now. Once only we can prevent forest fires. We're heading back.
Right.
So that's another element there. It's not about, because killing things just like Lord of the Rings is really tough. Kathy, when she played her first real game of bolt action, she's like, okay, I'm going to shoot at this. And I said, well, that's a 6 followed by a 6 followed by a 6. She said, what? And I said, yeah. It's small team, hard cover, down, move, range. In Lord of the Rings is similar. The strongest thing in the game, 3s are better. You can have the most giant troll fighting an ant. He still needs a 3 to wound that ant. There is no anything but 1s. Pretty much the same thing in bolt action.
Right.
If some other person is doing stuff on 3s and 4s, then somebody's done something horribly wrong. It should start at 5s and 6s and get worse from there. Maybe that's why we do all the strategic discussion in bolt action, because it is not point and click. There's nothing but hard choices, and most of those, they just get worse as it goes along. Because you don't get a whole turn. You draw order dice.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you don't know, you may get 7 in a row. You may not get any until the other person's drawn 4 in a row. You can't count on anything. So all of your strat, you can say, well, this was what I might want to do. It's like, oh, so you just destroyed that unit, and now I'm out that order dice. Happened in our last game. I was down 2 order dice before I'd even turned on the lights. And I went, well, that's unfortunate since I only started with 11, and you've got 16. So he was already practically up 2-1 on me in order dice. Which meant, and this was an objective type game, you had to go get the objectives. You couldn't just sit there and stay alive.
Right.
Well, this is going to be really tough. And we managed to pretty much get a draw out of that. But it took a lot of thinking. You have to, okay, I don't even want to bother shooting at that unit. I have to kill the thing that doesn't have an order dice. And once Roy learned, he's like, why won't you shoot at this? And I said, Roy, I need to take out that order dice before you can use it. And he said, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. Now, of course, he immediately started doing that to me. But that got me to start using units that he could have shot at. So leave the order dice at the things he can't get at. But the stuff he can hit, I darn well better use it, because now he knows that trick.
Right. So where can we see you doing these bat reps? Is this on your Patreon?
It's actually, you can just see it on my YouTube channel. I've got 4 bolt action videos there, and the ones that Roy and I do on the Eastern Front, that's on the blog. That's wapeliusblogspot.com. I think we've done 3 reports, and the ones on the blog are done in 3 parts. So you basically get 9 episodes there. And the video ones, they're a bit longer. They're usually 2 to 2.5 hours long.
Right.
But you see everything. And I also try to do historical what ifs. So the last one was, what happened if the Germans were aware that the British they were thinking of doing dynamo instead of just not really thinking something like that would happen. What if they got that peak earlier? Another one is, what would have happened if the French had showed up at Arras? Would the breakthrough have been bigger? Could they have even actually totally blocked the German advance, or at least gave even more time for the Dunkirk evacuation? Because that's what Arras did.
Yeah.
The Germans were waiting for some kind of counterattack. It finally happened, and they said, "Oh, now it's coming." It never really did afterwards, but in that battle, the French show up, and it made a big difference. It made a huge difference. So it's weird how in a system that's not super realistic, you can get kind of the gist of it, though. You know, in the first battle, it was the last one here was, could a small holding force block the Germans enough to give time for the escape, which is basically what happened. Small blocking forces basically created that pocket and gave them that window of time to escape and do the evacuation. I think my next one is going to be, what if the French in the winter of 1939 gone all out? What if the Belgians had said, screw our neutrality, come on in? So these are the kind of things that you're not changing a lot, you're just changing one factor.
Right.
Would that have made a difference? And eventually for people that hate early war stuff, I will be moving all the way through. We'll head to, we're doing Eastern Front, so everything is 1940, 41. Then we'll head into the desert, 42, work up into Italy for 43, back into Russia with Kursk and other things in 43. So we're kind of moving along a timeline. And eventually we'll get through to the later war stuff with all the toys that everybody likes to see.
Cool. Well, I think I'll have to spend some time maybe this weekend having a look at some of these bat reps. And I'm going to have to wrap up because I'm about to collapse.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, don't worry. No, not from listening to you. That it's 20 to 1 in the morning, and you probably need to go and have your dinner.
Yes, indeed. I was like, this troll looks mighty tasty.
Yeah, well, this predator's looking at me with exactly the same thought. With the lack of script in front of me, I'm going to say, find Models Workshop on Twitter at MWAH Podcast, which gets you through to Larry, not to me. You can find me at Mini Model Paint. You can find Jim on Twitter at...
Don't do the Twitter thing, but you can hit me on Facebook and especially on the blog. Lots of tutorials there.
Cool. And Ian, you're at the painting_troll?
I am on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook now.
Ooh. Oh, wow. You're doing your whole social thing.
Yeah, you've got to do it in threes, haven't you?
Well, yeah. And then you do none of it at all.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So, as always, this episode of Models Workshop After Hours has been sponsored by Audible.com, and refer back to a previous episode for the URL for that, and you'll get your 2 free books. Because I don't know it offhand, and I haven't written it down this week, and well, we didn't do one 2 weeks ago because of technological problems. So, in 2 weeks' time, I'll ask Ian what he's been up to.
Yep.
And maybe Jim will join us again at a later thing. It's been really great having you on, actually, Jim.
Well, thanks for having me. I create mayhem wherever I go, so...
we live for mayhem. That's fine.
And now we have horribly overpriced, insane products to sell to suckers.
That's fine. I'll take 15% of anything you you make on that.
Oh yeah, and I've promised 15% to 20 other people also.
There you go. It's a cumulative thing where you will sell 7 paints for $250 with a sticker in there, and you'll make $1 off it.
If that much.
Yeah. doesn't sound like a good business plan.
The anti-business plan.
Right. Well, we'll stick that with a free set of artist opus brushes and and there you go. That's it's business 101. So I'm going to say goodbye, good night, and thank you for listening. Ian, any last words?
Toodle pip.
Jim?
Good night, and never be afraid to experiment.
Nice one. See you soon.